For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Tabi Shomulikai, award-winning journalist and broadcaster Mandy Wiener joins me to unpack her book, The Deal, Inside the Talks That Shaped South Africa's Future. Welcome, Mandy.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, your recent book, The Deal, takes readers behind the scenes of the negotiations that ultimately led to the formation of the country's government of national unity after the 2024 national elections, which the ANC failed to receive an outright majority of the vote. So, can you tell us what inspired you to write this book and tell us the story of this important episode in recent South African history?
Well, I was curious, like so many journalists, about what was going on behind the scenes, and I wanted to know what was happening in those rooms. I believe that we all have a right to know what was going on. I so often have written about crime and the underworld and policing and politics as part of that, but for this book, I decided to focus on politics specifically. And what I really wanted to do was pull back the political veil and give people a sense of what happened behind the scenes during the negotiations, because I believe all South Africans have got a right to know. And I also believe that journalists should write the first draft of history. So that's why I decided to do this book.
And who were the main individuals from the ANC and the DA who managed to take forward the unlikely process of forming the GNU with the ANC and DA rivals at the center of the deal? Also, what was the role of the agreed statement of intent in achieving the deal?
So, firstly, I try to speak to as many people as possible in all the political parties when I wrote this deal, and there were quite a number of people who were involved. So, the ANC had a smaller technical team, and those people were David Makura and Kenke Kekana, Phoebe Porkita-Qobule, and then there was a broader team that was the negotiating team, which had members of the ANC NEC. So people like Nomvula Mokonyane, Fikile Mbalula, Gwen Ramakgopa, Gwede Mantashe. So there was a much broader team. On the DA side, they had a very clear negotiating team. It was Helen Zille, it was Ivan Meyer. John Steenhuisen was not part of it as the leader, but it was Ryan Coetzee, Tony Leon, Siviwe Gwahobe. Yeah, that was six of them. So a lot of the focus for most people is on the negotiations between the ANC and the DA and what came out with the statement of intent, which was the initial document that was signed on the 14th of June. But what I've tried to reflect is the broader negotiations. So how the other parties, the Patriotic Alliance, the UDM, the PAC, the Freedom Front Plus were all involved in the negotiations as well, signing the statement of intent. But then also what was happening with the Progressive Caucus on the side. I try and tell that story too.
And some argue that the MK and the EFF excluded themselves from the GNU by the extreme demands that they were making and how they conducted themselves in the negotiations. So do you think that is true?
So it's interesting. Somebody like Advocate Dali Mpofu argues that actually the DA and the ANC deal was always going to happen regardless, and the EFF and the MK knew that this was going to happen. The DA had the strategy of last man standing, where they also felt that they would make themselves as appealing as possible, and the EFF and the MK would exclude themselves. And I think that the EFF's approach to that meeting with the ANC was so arrogant and so aggressive that in a way they did exclude themselves. And the MK similarly insisted that the only way that they would do a deal is if Cyril Ramaphosa was removed, and the ANC was never going to do that.
And to what extent did pressure from business and market concerns and concerns about South Africa's economic future influence the process?
Quite a bit. And in the book, actually, business is actually almost a character in itself because there was enormous pressure from business, from the markets. There are a number of instances of politicians telling me about how funders or big business players, wealthy businessmen, were phoning them up and saying, you've got to do a deal. They were acting as intermediaries in the back channels as well. And this constant threat of the bottom falling out of the rand of the markets was a driver in the ANC and the DA entering into a deal. And in fact, I think that the DA points to that as one of the reasons as to why it came away with a less than ideal deal, because there was so much pressure from the media and so much pressure from business.
Also, Mandy, the GNU has managed to hold together for well over a year so far, despite some serious areas of disagreement. So do you believe the GNU has the resilience to last until the next election in 2029? Also, do you think the next year's local government elections impact on the GNU?
Yes, I think it's the local government elections are definitely going to impact. I think what we have at the moment is an unhappy marriage where the parents are staying together for the kids, and the kids are you and me and the electorate out there. And I think that what we're seeing now is very much the Democratic Alliance acting as opposition in government, the ANC getting very frustrated. The latest example of that is the DA's proposed new policies on empowerment, and the ANC saying that they're acting as an opposition, and it's untenable. Having said that, though, I don't think the GNU is going to break up as a result of it, because I think both the ANC and the DA know that the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. So I think it's going to get very messy over the local government elections. I think things are going to be very strained, but I think it'll stay together until the next national election in 2029. A lot of that also depends on succession in the ANC and the DA. Who succeeds Cyril Ramaphosa at the ANC conference in 2027? Who succeeds John Steenhuisen at the DA's elective conference? Or will he come out successful again? I think that's going to be a determining factor.
And do you think the GNU-based government in KZN, which is based on a very narrow margin, will survive, or that the strength of the MK party will see a change in government in KZN?
Yeah.
Also, will these threaten the national GNU, or will a different configuration in KZN take shape, as has happened in Gauteng?
I think that KZN is a different story to the national story. And remember, KZN, you have the largest party, the MK, with 45% not forming a government, which is so unusual. So that was always on a fine line. The NFP, with just one vote, was able to tip it in the favor of the ANC IFP DA coalition. But there was also the possibility it could go with MK. It came right down to the wire. Now the NFP says it's pulling out of the government of provincial unity. So I think it's very likely that we could see a shake-up in KZN. I don't think it'll have an impact on the national government of national unity. The IFP is desperate to hang on to KZN. So I think they'll do whatever they can to hang on to KZN. I'm not sure MK is in a position to be able to form a government in terms of its structures, the organization itself. I'd be very surprised if they were able to actually form a government in KZN.
And do you think at a national level, the GNU might expand to include more smaller parties, such as Action SA and the National Colored Congress? Also, how do you think the DA would respond to such a development?
I think there've already been overtures. We saw it over the budget where the ANC said they wanted to open negotiations with Action SA and the NCC. I think that that's kind of quietened down now. I think that perhaps if we see another issue over the budget or something like that again, we could see that door being reopened. The DA doesn't want more parties in the government of national unity because it dilutes its presence. And it was quite clear from the outset that they believed that they were the senior party in the GNU. They've always made that clear as well. And I think that's how the DA actually views this arrangement, is that they are the senior party. However, the ANC is at pains to stress that actually it's a GNU with all of these parties, everyone gets a say. So I think the DA would probably oppose it. And I don't think the ANC would push it. I'm not sure Action SA would want to go into a GNU at the moment. I think they'll wait until there's leverage and they can benefit from it.
And as South Africa has a proportional representation system, it is likely that no political party will achieve more than 50% of the vote in future national elections. As such, coalition politics will become the norm of South Africa. So do you think this will lead to increased instability in our politics?
I think we need to learn how to manage it better. I think it's an inevitability. I think, as you say, I don't foresee a situation where one party will get more than 50% again. So I think we need better legislation around how coalitions are formed. It's crazy to think that our leaders had to do all of this in 14 days when it takes somewhere like Belgium a year and a half to sort out a coalition government. So I think we need to rethink it. I'm also in favor of a threshold so that there are fewer smaller parties and it's easier to negotiate with bigger parties at the table. But I think it's an inevitability and we're going to have to learn how to manage it better.
Mhm. And finally, Mandy, in writing this book, you interviewed over 20 key political parties, including a last-minute interview with President Cyril Ramaphosa. So did this leave you with the perception that Ramaphosa was the key architect behind the creation of South Africa's GNU?
Yes, I do think so. Even though he wasn't directly involved in the negotiations, he was the architect, he was the strategist behind the scenes. And that's why it was so important for me to speak to him. I think that he deployed a lot of the tactics that he had learned at Codesa. He ran the clock down. He withheld meetings with John Steenhuisen. I think that was his strategy very much. Look, I think the team did a lot of the work as well. And this is the great question that I was asking throughout the book to every politician is, do you believe the ANC lost the election but won the negotiations? There's different views on this, of course, but I think the fact that the ANC walked away with President, Deputy President, Speaker of the National Assembly, Finance Minister, International Relations Minister, I think that says a lot about how the ANC managed these negotiations through bilaterals and the tactics that were deployed. But at the same time, I think the DA was under so much pressure, time, media, business pressure as well, and the threat of the EFF and the MK looming, that it was all just done in so much haste that it was difficult for anyone to negotiate better than what they did.
That was Mandy Wiener discussing her book, The Deal. Visit the Polity website to access more author interviews, news and information updates. If you haven't already, subscribe to Polity's email services, including our new monthly Polity Bookshelf email, to stay informed about the latest news and Polity Bookshelf developments.